cough straight off. Hello and welcome back to Storytime with Alex. We're reading chapter 9 now of From Allbyon to Britannia, book 3, The Last Wizard. They need a plan. They need to get back the Book of Spells so that they can restore Sebastian's magic, and they need to save Leia and her gran, and it's all very urgent. So, let's see what they come up with. Sit back, relax. Chapter 9, The Invisible Burglar. We spent a long time discussing what to do. Mum volunteered to go to Temple House, as the only one of us who had not been there. Ruth said she would go with her, but Brenda Brown would recognise all of us from the Triangle, even if the blacks did not know us. And with the extra people in the house, how could we find a way of getting in and out again without getting caught? Dad suggested that it might be time to tell the police about Leia and her gran. If the police could be convinced that Leia's gran was being kept there against her will, they might go in and rescue her. But how could we prove it? The nasty mob was keeping a close eye on Leia. She had kept in touch by text on Hecate's lost phone when she was supposed to be asleep at night. It was getting late, so we texted her. She replied almost immediately and told us she had tried going to the police before, but because she had been in trouble when she was younger, she felt that they did not take her seriously. Also, even if the police came and rescued Leia's gran, that would not help us to get the Book of Spells back. All we need to do, said Dad wearily, is get all the nasty mob out of Temple House in such a way that we can get in, rescue Leia and her gran, and find and take the book out without anyone seeing us. Something hit me. Without anyone seeing us. There's an invisibility spell, I said slowly. I've not tried it yet, but theoretically there are dangers, shadows, noises obviously, smoke, footprints. I was particularly fond of the Claude Rains film of the Invisible Man. Could enough of us get in without being seen to get the book and Leia and her gran out? Ruth asked. I thought about it for a while. According to Leia's text, there are another 4 people in that house, plus the blacks and Brenda Brown. That's 7 people. Their warding spell wouldn't stop us, but they know that, and they must be on the lookout for us. Even if we were all invisible, if any of them realised what we were doing, they could use the Book of Spells to make us visible. The conversation went on, but we couldn't come up with a plan. Marco had gone out into the garden for a smoke, and Sebastian had not returned and had probably gone back to bed. I found myself following Marco. He was sitting on our garden bench, and I joined him. Want a fag? Marco asked. I laughed. No thanks. My mum would kill me, and probably you too. I didn't want one, but was secretly pleased that he'd asked me. Made me feel more grown up. I'm glad you came out here, said Marco. I've got an idea, but there are too many people. It's all getting overcomplicated. What's your idea? I think we're trying to do too many things at once. The first thing we need to do is get that Book of Spells back, and get Sebastian back to his old self. Then we'll have 2 wizards, or at least 1.5. I don't think I qualify as half a wizard yet, but thanks. Yeah, you're right. We need to get the book back first, and soon, before that woman has a chance to destroy it. Then, Marco continued, that lot won't have any magic of their own. It'll be a lot easier to get Leia and her gran. He took a drag on his cigarette. I think I have a plan, but I'm not sure your mum and dad would approve. I think we might need to indulge in some good old-fashioned burglary, which will be a lot easier with a burglar who's invisible, and it would be even easier if we did it at night. He gave me a look. This was his plan, the plan that Mum and Dad would indeed not approve of, but it did sound like a good plan. I could borrow my mate's van again. Even better, I could borrow another mate's car in case they recognised the van. Pick you up here, just the 2 of us. What do you think? You up for it? I'd need to practice the invisibility spell, I replied, partly to give myself time to think, but we do need to get on with it. At that point, I was called back into the house to do the washing up. Ruth was drying the dishes with me, so in a while we were all alone together. I told her about Marco's plan. I think it's a good plan, but I think you should tell your dad. What if he won't let me do it? It's dangerous, but I think it'd be worth the risk. Perhaps you should trust him. I hate keeping all this from my mum, and the longer it goes on, the more difficult it will be to tell her. There's only ever been the 2 of us. Your dad backed me up when I skipped off school, but we had a long talk on the tube on the way home. He wanted me to tell her all about it. He said I would have to sooner or later, or it would come between us, and that would be awful. I'm training to be a witch. How much of my life would I have to hide from her if I never told her? I've sort of decided that when she comes back from Los Angeles, I'm going to tell her. It'll be hard. I don't know where to start. Tell your dad. If I were you, I'd start with Bilbo. Pardon? Bilbo in The Hobbit. He used the ring to make himself invisible and became a burglar. I hadn't thought of that. Marco came into the kitchen and said, I'm off home now, and then more quietly, if you're up for it, phone me, any time, no time to lose. I can get the car and come and collect you whenever. He smiled at Ruth and left. Ruth gave me a look. Tell your dad. Father Joe and Rose came into the kitchen to say goodbye, as they were going home too. As they left, Dad came into the kitchen to make coffee. Ruth gave me the look again and disappeared. I took a deep breath. Can I talk to you about something? I've got an idea. I started with Bilbo. He'd read The Hobbit when he was a kid and read it to me when I was young. I'd read it since, and we'd seen the films together. However, as soon as I mentioned him, Dad said, Bilbo, the dwarf's burglar, stealing from the dragon Smaug, with a ring that made him invisible? I think I see where this conversation is going. I told him that Marco had offered to help me, and the details of the plan. Dad was silent for what seemed to be a long time. He said eventually. If the plan did not involve my 13-year-old son, I'd say it was a good idea. The best idea any of us have had. Does it have to be you? Can't you make Marco invisible and get him to do the burgling? Probably. I don't know. I've not even tried to spell yet, but like Bilbo, I'm smaller than Marco or anyone else here. I admit that even Ruth is taller than me now, but I do have my little bits of magic. I can open locks. You saw me knock over the nasty mob. I do have some spells to protect me. I was trying to sound grown up rather than like a wheedling kid. If you're going to do this, and I agree it needs doing as soon as possible, then I'm coming with you and Marco, he said firmly. Are we going to tell Mum? I asked. Yes, we are. Well, I am. Stay here and leave it to me. He made the coffee and took it into the living room to Mum. Ruth had gone to her room. Mercifully, I could not hear their conversation. Then Mum called me in. She looked worried. Your dad's told me about your plan and somehow has convinced me that it's worth the risk, Bilbo Baggins. Thanks. I'll be extremely careful, I promise. We need to try this for Sebastian. It worked out for Bilbo. She shook her head. Before there was any chance of her changing her mind, I said, I must go and practice the invisibility spell. I'll phone Marco, Dad said. Sebastian was asleep in my room, so I joined Ruth in her room. It did not seem to be the spare room anymore, to practice the spell. It was strange casting a spell in front of Ruth. I'd got used to seeing her practicing her witch's magic, and now I was practicing magic too, though of a different kind. It was an odd spell. I could still see myself in the wardrobe mirror, but somehow Ruth didn't notice that I was there anymore. Dad came to tell me that Marco would be here about midnight. At about 11, Leia texted us. Hi, we texted back. Where is the book of spells now? Locked in cupboard in Black's bedroom, up front stairs, first door on right. Planning to steal it tonight. Be careful. Mob keeping watch day and night. We will. Don't forget Gran and me. We won't. As midnight approached, I got more nervous. I practiced the invisibility spell 3 times. I demonstrated it to Mum and Dad. Mum looked impressed but worried. In the end, I quietly looked through my bedroom door at Sebastian, who was fast asleep. He was why I was doing this. At about midnight, Marco arrived in his friend's car and we set off. Mum watched us go from the front door. Even after all that had happened, it seemed very unreal to be driving away from the Albury Triangle to try and steal anything, let alone a wizard's book of spells. I gripped my notebook. Once I was in the house, I would have to remember any spells I needed to use. There would be no chance to read them from my book. I hoped that the spells had somehow sunk into me well enough to recall them when I needed. The journey around the North Circular seemed to take hours, even though there was much less traffic than during the day. I wondered what the people in the other cars were going to do. Were they going home or going out? Eventually, we turned off the North Circular, up the hill towards Pilgrim's Green. We passed Bourne Road, with Temple House on the corner. There was a figure standing on the garden who must be on guard. We turned right at the next road and drove around the block to end up in Bourne Road, but several houses away from the corner. Before getting out of the car, I spoke the invisibility spell to make sure the figure in the garden did not see me. I could feel something had happened. Dad said, "Are you still there?" So it had worked. I opened the door as quietly as I could. "Leave the door open," I whispered. "I might be in a hurry on the way back. I'll still be invisible, I hope." "You're absolutely sure the book will be invisible too?" "Absolutely. It would take on the spell when I put it in the shoulder bag I borrowed. I practiced a lot with volumes of the encyclopedia in Ruth's room." "If you're not back in half an hour, we're coming to get you," said Dad. I did not respond. "I'm going now," I whispered. I climbed out of the car and walked quietly along the road towards Temple House. When I reached the edge of the garden, I stopped. I felt that they had cast the warding spell again. I reflected that would have kept out anyone but me. I carefully undid the spell. The person in the garden had strolled around the corner towards me. I held my breath. He was a short man with a shaved head. He looked straight at me and through me. He walked on across the front and disappeared round the side of the house. I breathed again and walked to the front gate and up to the door. I muttered the unlock spell and pushed open the door. As I stepped across the threshold, an inner voice said, "And now you're a burglar, or you will be when you take something away." I quietly closed the door behind me. The front hall was quite bright because there was a street light outside. It was very quiet. I looked at my watch. It was 2 a.m. I crept as quietly as I could up the stairs. One of the steps creaked loudly and I paused, but there was no reaction anywhere and I carried on. On the landing, I turned to the right. I looked at the door handle and got ready to turn it and open the door as quietly as I could when the handle turned. Someone was coming out. I quickly pressed myself against the wall, and out from the room crept Brenda Brown, holding a large oblong shape wrapped in dark fabric. I did not need wizardly skills to realise that it was the Book of Spells. She had stolen it from the cupboard herself. All I could do was follow her. She went back down the stairs and turned towards the back of the house. I followed, trying to keep in the shadows, but keeping quite close to her in case she went through a door, which was lucky because she opened the kitchen door and went in. She went straight to a table to put down the book, and I managed to creep in and stand in a corner before she turned to close it. Then I realised what she was about to do. In the middle of one wall was a big Aga cooker. The fire had died down, but there was a glow that showed it had not gone out. Brenda Brown was going to burn the Book of Spells. What was I going to do now? I had to think quickly. How could I stop her? I wished I knew how Rose had put her to sleep last time we'd been here, but I didn't know any spells like that. I went through what I knew. I needed a distraction. I stretched out my hand and conjured the ball of light. It looked alarmingly bright in the dark kitchen, and I immediately sent it to the other side of the room. She looked up in alarm, then looked wildly around and could not see me. I made the light dance around like Tinker Bell. Brenda Brown walked around the table to get a closer look at it. I held my breath, crept forward, and picked up the book. As quietly as I could, I pushed it into my bag. It got stuck, and I felt I was taking hours to get it in the bag. I just pulled the flap over the top when she turned around to face me. I froze. She looked at the table and clapped her hand over her mouth. I retreated as quietly as I could and pressed myself against the wall as far from her as I could get. I got the ball of light to dance around her face. She started to flap at it with her hands. I dived for the door, opened it, went through, and closed it behind me. The ball of light disappeared as soon as I left the room, and she followed almost immediately. In my haste, I turned the wrong way. She was now between me and the way back to the front door, and was only a couple of feet away from me. I felt in the pocket of my jeans and found a bottle top. I drew it out as quietly as possible, threw it over her head in the direction of the front of the house. As it hit the floor, she swiveled towards the noise, and I began to walk backwards towards the side door, feeling my way with one hand along the passage wall. As she walked away from me towards the front of the house, I reached the side door, muttered the unlocking spell as quietly as I could and opened it, but she heard the click of the door opening, and turned back. "Who are you?" she hissed, dashing towards me. "What are you? I know you're there. You've got my book." She lunged at me as I ran out of the door and nearly fell down the steps into the garden. The man on guard had just come around the corner and saw Brenda Brown almost fall down the steps herself. I skidded out of the way and walked as quickly and quietly as I could around the corner into the back garden. "What's going on?" said the guard. "There was something in the kitchen!" she shrieked. "It's out here now!" The light from the street lighting threw dappled light into the garden, and I was worried that they would see my shadow. I stood still in the middle of a patch of grass and realised a fairy was looking at me quizzically. Brenda and the man were blundering around quite noisily, so I said quietly to the fairy, "Can you see me?" "It's a nice little spell, little wizard, but doesn't work on fairy eyes." "Can fairies make little balls of light like will-o'-the-wisps?" "Oh yes. Would you make some for me to distract them, so that I can get away?" "I'll bring you milk." The fairy laughed. "Tee-hee, we'd love to." As I stood there, a whole flock of lights appeared from all over the garden and began to flock around Brenda Brown and the man. They both started to flap their hands. The man started to swear loudly. I looked at them one more time, it was very funny, and then ran around the other side of the house and out through the front gate, then down the road and into the car. By then I'd forgotten that I was invisible and made Marco swear and my dad jump. "Sorry," I said, "I've got the book, let's go home." As we drove past Temple House and around the corner onto the main road, Brenda Brown and the man were still flapping around the garden, surrounded by lights. "Is that you?" Dad asked. "No, the fairy's doing that. We'll have to bring them some more milk." I undid the invisibility spell as Dad phoned Mum to say we were okay. All the way home I hugged the book to my chest, scarcely able to believe I had succeeded. I was wondering how Bilbo must have felt when he stole the Arkenstone. Marco let us out in front of our house and drove off. I wondered to myself if he had told his friend he was borrowing his car. Mum was waiting for us and hugged me extremely tightly. Mum and Dad went off to bed, and I sneaked up the stairs and into my room. Sebastian was fast asleep, so I put his book of spells on my bedside table so that he could see it when he woke up. I felt like Santa Claus. Then I returned to the living room, lay down on the sofa and went to sleep. I should probably have taken my clothes off, but all I managed to do was kick off my shoes. So it's great, they have the book of spells now, but Leia and her gran are still captured. Let's see what happens in the next chapter. See you then.